Welcome. I'm Jessica Tejan, and this is the Evolving to Exceptional podcast, where we talk about reaching peak performance in our workplaces, homes, and communities so that we can live our best life possible, an exceptional life. Welcome back to this new episode of Evolving to Exceptional. This is our first episode that is going to be part of our Evolving Workplaces series. You've got Jessica Tejan and Meldina Alabasic here to talk about today's really important topic that is a little bit controversial as well: corporates dead, businesses beings. And so we want to dive into a little bit as to why we're putting together this Evolving Workplaces series and what kind of the problem is that we're going to be solving. So as an author, I am really excited to be writing this new book around evolving workplaces and how our workplaces need to evolve and transform in a way that they haven't before. And the reason that I think this is so pertinent right now is that we've existed so long with all the organizations and institutions reflecting the same type of cultural existence that in many cases we can't actually see any other way. We've been so entrenched in this particular approach to business that we can't even see a world that's different from or alternatives beyond the current culture of achievement, competition, and hierarchy. And so I believe, and I wrote an article on LinkedIn, some of you may have read it, that corporate is dying, that people are tired of the corporate experience, and that whether it's dead or it needs to die, and it needs to go away, that it's happening, and we're in the process of that.
So Jessica, when you say corporate, what do you exactly mean? What defines that traditional corporate culture?
Yeah, it took us a while to kind of come up with this list, I think, of what, intuitively we hear people say, "Oh, I hate corporate. I hate being a part of corporate. Who wants to be in corporate?" You hear all these comments about it. But what makes that up? What is that traditional corporate culture? So for our listeners here, when you think of this word, I want you to just think about what kind of images come to mind. If you're not driving, if you're in a safe place, close your eyes and just think about what are some of the things that come to mind. Meldina, what are some of the things that come to mind to you? What are corporate images that come to mind?
For me, I think that on-site, in the office presence is huge. I feel like that has changed dramatically since COVID, but pre-COVID, I absolutely think that's what jumps out at me when I first think about corporate.
Yeah, and I think for me as I thought about this and preparing for this episode, it's the tall buildings, it's the gray,
Mhm.
it's the suits, it's the
The
formal
cubicles.
structure, the cubicles. Yeah, that's funny you say that because actually when I was growing up in high school, I swore I would never work in a cubicle, that I hated cubicles. So it's that feeling, and when you think about these images, how do they make you feel? They don't make you feel full of joy,
Mhm.
happiness, and wanting to do your best work. They make you feel stuck. So here are some of the things we mean by corporate. Like you hit on, Meldina. Certainly the traditional elements of on-site, in-person, a typical 9 to 5 work for the man kind of mentality, an office space. Thinking about the movie Office Space type of model or image. It's a very hierarchical approach where there's very clear command, centralized authority. There's not a lot of distributed participation in decision making. It's all kind of concentrated at the top. It's typically a very male dominated leadership approach where most of the leadership positions are filled by men. It can be very political where there's not a lot of visibility and clarity. There's a lot of game playing, favorites, and bias that kind of comes into play if you're willing to join the culture of the club or not be part of the club. There's not a lot of communication and transparency. Those that have power kind of control the flow of communication. That's how they keep and maintain that power. There's also very clearly defined roles in relationships. In really corporate structures, they get very organized and established so that every job has a very limited scope and it's a very specific set of activities that they are supposed to do. The bigger the organization, the more specific that they can be, and versus giving people a broad scope of responsibility. They can be very achievement obsessed. So work comes first, which means long hours, lots of effort. It's hard. It's a struggle. It's exhausting. It's what's the saying, like the grind, it's part of putting in the grind. Um and they can also be very competitive. So there's a lot of competition, between individuals. So competing for promotions, for responsibility, for opportunities. But then there's also competition between departments for resources, for money, for prestige. I've seen it where, in a lot of cases, one department gets more privileges maybe than another department because of what they deliver or because of the power that the leader in that department actually has. Traditional corporate cultures are also typically very risk adverse, which means that they're very slow to change and their systems are designed to be stable. They're designed to continually create output and do it consistently and at the highest mode possible. And there's a job first priority or mentality. Put your job and work above everything else. When your boss calls, you drop everything. You stay to work on the weekend. You come in, you do what you have to do to support the business. And then there's a bosses versus coaches mentality, where you've got bosses who are in control, they're in charge, they're directing the work, they're telling you how to get it done, versus a coaching approach where you have managers or coaches that are there to support, encourage, remove obstacles for their employees, not direct the work themselves. So this is kind of the what we think of by corporate culture. I think some people naturally react repulsively to this and are like, "Oh, this is awful. Like I see all the problems." But there's others that are pretty entrenched in it. This is just how businesses run. What do you think some of the things are that is wrong with this corporate culture?
So one thing that I think that I see kind of wrong with this corporate culture is the lack of flexibility. That's the really what kind of jumps out at me. I actually sat on a virtual conference about 2 weeks ago, an all-day conference where I listened to HR folks kind of talk about what challenges they're experiencing, and a lot of kind of a theme that I saw throughout what they were saying was people just want more flexibility. They want more autonomy, more freedom than ever before. And so I think that's why we're seeing this shift a little bit and what's wrong with it and why people see it in kind of that negative light that we're talking about.
Yeah, it brings me back to my experience when I was an intern. So I did a ton of internships throughout undergrad, grad school, and law school. And I remember working for a city government. I won't say which one, but I remember working for a city government. And I was just getting churning stuff out, getting stuff done. And I remember them saying, you need to slow down how fast you're working so you can fill in the day, so you can fill in your 9 to 5 hours. And I was like, but I don't want to fill in my 9 to 5. If this is only 5 hours of work, then I can go do something else for the next three. Like, why would I? I don't understand. And, but when you pay people hourly and when it's based on putting in the hours, not on executing or creating results or what gets accomplished, then you create kind of that traditional mentality of like, it's got to be from this time to this time. And they have to see you sitting there. They have to see
Mhm.
you in place. I just heard from somebody, I heard a reference that their manager actually said to them that they can't determine who's high potential unless they can see them in the office.
Mhm. Wow.
Right? I didn't know
Wow.
that you could actually determine potential based on just watching someone sit in an office, but that I think that's a great example of that traditional mentality.
Yeah, absolutely. So why are people, in your opinion, Jessica, why are people thinking that this corporate culture is dying, aside from what we just talked about?
So I think like kind of each of the elements have something to it. Like we just talked about the traditional piece of it. When employees are required to work fully on site, they, they actually would prefer something else. They would prefer more of that hybrid, that or fully remote experience. And I think that stems from a desire to have their work be more about what they're accomplishing
Mhm.
than just their presence. And so when they're forced to work on site, I think it decreases their engagement. It lowers their well-being. It um, increases the possibility that they're going to leave, and it increases the chance that they're going to have burnout because they're putting in time rather than accomplishing objectives.
Yeah, and that actually reminds me, I've been just kind of browsing what job openings there are on LinkedIn, and I've noticed that now so many of them will have in parentheses fully remote because that's become such a big thing, or hybrid potential, right? Because that's something that's very, very important to candidates now as they're looking for jobs. And for people that are currently in roles where they're being forced to be on site, I think a lot of them are leaving their jobs for that reason because they need that flexibility. They want to have the opportunity to choose where and how they work.
Exactly. And I think, when it comes to the hierarchical element, the culture of lots of levels of
Mhm.
leadership, levels of managers, I think what one thing that happens there is people get stuck with the ladder being the only way to move, the only way to grow, to increase their compensation. And so they get stuck in, I have to become a manager and then a
Mhm.
director and then a vice president. Whether I'm qualified or good at it or not, that's my only path for growth and development. And I think it also really traps the power or the decision making at a level in the organization that can't possibly have visibility to everything else that's going on in the organization. When things are changing as fast as they are, in your three levels up, you can't possibly know what the right decision is for how to modify workflows or decide how things are getting
Mhm.
accomplished three levels down when you haven't done it for 10, 15 years, or even maybe 2 years, with how fast things are changing. And so I think that becomes a problem for employees feeling frustrated with those in control not actually having the knowledge they need to be making the good decisions for the organization. And then we touched on, the leadership of women and women in leadership positions. And even with as much focus as I think that there's been on this in the last maybe decade, women still only hold 21% of senior leadership positions. So that is a significantly
Mhm.
smaller number. And they only represent 4% of CEOs in the S&P 500 companies. So there's still a very limited influence of a female style of leadership or approach to leadership within businesses.
I think, Jessica, you hit on something a little bit that I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into around, you know, a lot of people see that traditional kind of climbing up the corporate ladder as the only way to develop within an organization. And one thing that I've seen is because employees feel that way and they feel like that's the only way that they can move up in an organization and get more responsibility, they're forced almost into this managerial role that they might not even want, right? And that's how we get to that problem of having, poor managers. And we know through Gallup's research that managers account for 70% of an employee's engagement. So when we have someone who just sees kind of that one path forward, it's got to be up is the only way, right? They land in these manager roles and they don't really even want to do them. And so therefore, they're probably not going to do all the right things to make sure that their teams are staying engaged, that they're producing, they're achieving results.
Meanwhile, the opposite is true too, right? You have people who choose not to move up because they
Yeah.
don't want that level of responsibility, but then they're stuck,
Yes.
unable to actually grow in terms of compensation and responsibility without taking on people leadership and people management. So it really hinders the potential growth paths or organizational structures you can use when you're stuck in this hierarchical model. Another challenge around the defined roles and relationships, those clearly defined roles. Well, most corporate businesses have been optimizing their work processes since the 1980s. There's been Six Sigma and process mapping and all the different tools to really reduce error, increase efficiency, and improve effectiveness, to squeeze out every inch of additional optimization that is possible and improve productivity. But the reality is, if you look at statistics, productivity has actually not improved over our history. We kind of plateaued out, and we're not getting those benefits from the increases of technology and optimization that we've put in place. And because we've got these hard structural processes, we are kind of treating people as if they're parts of a machine that we can just swap one in and out for another. We'll just train another one to do the same thing. And that creates limited flexibility and adaptability. And it actually worked well when we had roles that were very specific. So when our roles were very focused on one specific task. I am welding in this, the rivets into this part of the car, or something in terms of manufacturing. When it had a very specific function that you're playing, then it works really well to optimize in that way. But as our work has become more complex and as our work has become more automated, that has created more challenge with these roles and relationships being so limited and not adaptable.
Right. That's where we hear the "it's not my job," right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's not my job. It's not, it's not in my
I
scope.
don't
And
know how to do it exactly.
another another challenge I think is the achievement focused. The work comes first before everything else. And I'm going to be real vulnerable and honest here. That's how I was brought up. That's how I that was the culture in which I learned and lived my life up until COVID hit, up until I experienced a literal stress tipping and breaking point with being a full time vice president, leader in a business, having three kids, twin 9-month-old girls, and my at the time 3-year-old son. Trying to balance childcare, managing IT, managing HR, handling the legal issues, all the changes that were happening. It just became too much. And I think that the same thing happened for a lot of people. That when they went through COVID, when they went through the pandemic, that their time at home with their family, that seeing the potential, risk of life ending before they maybe anticipated, they realized that there's a lot more to life. There's a lot more
Mhm.
experiences. And I remember, some of the employees I talked to, sharing that they had never had breakfast with their kids before, or that they weren't even seeing their kids during the week because they left before breakfast and they came home
Yes.
after bedtime. And that being there changed everything in terms of their relationships and in terms of how they live their life. So I think that's really where we're seeing this shift away from an achievement focused approach to where people really want to enjoy their lives. They don't want to just make all these sacrifices waiting for retirement someday to actually start living and start enjoying their lives. They want something different. And that's why we're seeing the great reset, the great resignation, whatever you want to call it. We're seeing all this turnover and new businesses popping up, including ours, Evolving to Exceptional, because people want to live differently. They want to create different cultures and exist in a different way when it comes to their work and their life.
Yeah, that actually reminds me of not too long ago, I was scrolling through LinkedIn and I saw a funny kind of HR meme come across with a guy who was on vacation. And he said that he set himself a goal every day. He was still going to send one email out the door just so that everyone knew, even though he was on vacation, that he was still working. He wanted to show that he's not going to take any time off, really, that he's still going to be focused on achieving the results, making sure that things are going smoothly. And I thought to myself, how toxic is that culture, right? Like where you are so focused on doing what you're supposed to be doing and fulfilling that one role that you're neglecting the other parts of you too, right? With, not focusing on spending time with your family on vacation, not enjoying those experiences because we're so focused on we've got to finish out that project. We've got to push out all those products and fulfill all those orders, and it's very, I mean, it's toxic. It's not a good culture to have.
Exactly. And I think that we took it for granted for so
Yeah.
long that that was just the way it was. That was all we could see. That was all that we knew. And, in some ways, all of these things are looking at them this way are kind of like, if you've ever seen the video of the flea in the jar, and if
Mhm.
you haven't, look it up, that fleas will, if you put a lid on a jar, they'll only jump as high as the lid, even when you remove the lid, and that they can't actually see that they're able to go beyond it. They're able to get out of the jar because that lid's always been there. And I think similarly through COVID, that lid kind of came off and people were finally able to see there's more. There's more
Yeah.
outside this jar. There's more outside this way of living and operating. And we want to experience it. We want to experience more. The next element is competitive, right? And, corporate environments are historically highly competitive, and competition can be good, it can be energizing in some instances. But when it comes to business, it can actually hurt workplace performance. When you put people against each other, then they're no longer working together for the greatest outcome for
Mhm.
everyone. They're working on and focused on what's going to get them further. And this is where a lot of the politics comes into play, a lot of the game playing, who gets credit for what, who gets visibility to what or for what, who can control what, and that creates a really kind of hostile environment that I think employees just want to resist, want to push away from.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, when you think about it, if you're only recognizing 10% of your organization, you're ignoring the other 90% because they're not meeting that level of performance. How does that make that 90% feel? You
Exactly,
know?
right? Yeah, and there's that stress and that level of concern of, even when it comes to performance metrics, how am I measuring up?
Mhm.
What is the measurement? And if it even impacts hiring decisions, I don't want to hire people that are too talented. That could hurt, myself or the rest of the team. So it really can negatively integrate or influence everything. The next element is risk aversion. And corporations by nature, they're focused on maximizing profit for shareholders. And so there's this intense focus on not on mitigating risk and avoiding risk. And with the way that change is happening today, it is undoubtedly happening at the highest rate ever in all of history. I think one of Joe Biden's quotes, I think it was in his maybe his last speech or maybe one before it, he talked about that the rate of change is 20 times what it was in the decade prior. So it's just moving so much faster that when these corporations are stuck and they can't, their bureaucracies prevent that nimble agile approach or response to challenges, then you're only able to really rely on incremental slow changes. You're only really able to rely on incremental and slow changes, which aren't going to be enough to keep up with that rate of change.
Yeah, I think we've just seen, a tremendous increase in the amount of change with the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, that forced everyone to change. And I think the large organizations that are still around today were the ones that were able to move quickly on their feet, were able to get new processes, new um, expectations set when everyone was forced to work remotely and when we saw things changing so rapidly. And the ones that kind of got left in the dark were the ones that were a lot larger, where we're seeing a lot more of those elements of the traditional corporate culture.
And I think that I think it's important to highlight here that I think businesses are doing their best to pivot right now and to shift. So when we talk about this and we talk about businesses struggling, it they should be. It's
Mhm.
natural to be in this state because that's the culture we existed in for so long. And so the companies and the corporations that exist in this traditional structure did so for a reason. It was profitable and it worked. Um and so really it's about acknowledging how things have changed that are going to require that shift. So the last two kind of elements is people wanting to enjoy their lives. We've talked a little bit about that, not having their jobs be at the center of everything and everything else kind of revolving around it. And then also that boss versus coach mentality of really knowing that great managers have a huge impact on performance and results, and that the traditional boss, again, I think Office Space is like the perfect that movie is like the perfect analogy for the corporate culture and the boss, yeah, I'm going to need you to work this weekend. That mentality that whatever the boss says goes, that they get to direct and point fingers and be in charge and all of those pieces, instead of being like that supporting style coach.
We've talked about kind of how people are feeling, why we're seeing these changes, but what really has changed in our workforce? Why are people kind of starting to hate that traditional corporate culture and talking nasty about it and really don't want to be a part of it? What's changed in our workforce since at one point that was kind of the end all be all, right? That was the goal, to kind of fit into that stereotypical traditional corporate culture. What's changed?
Yeah, so like if you think about the traditional corporate culture as that well-oiled machine, it is the people that have changed. The people care about different things, they want different things. And we know now from science and all of the studies that have been done around our brains and neurology and how our brains work, that humans can actually achieve more than ever before if they're equipped with the knowledge, tools, and capabilities to do so. And because we know that as human beings, because we know that that's true, we're unwilling to just put in the hours for the sake of putting in the hours. We want our work to mean something, and we want it to be a meaningful part of our overall lives. And then I think our world's changed. Our world is moving faster, it's changing quicker. There are new problems and challenges, many which we haven't faced before, or at least haven't faced before in the current culture, the current climate, and the current context, like the most recent pandemic. There had been pandemics before, but never in a world that was as globalized as the world is today. And these bigger cultural issues, and challenges people are taking more interest in,
Mhm.
I think, than ever before, are really saying it's time to shift, to be different, to do something different, which means how we think about and run our businesses also have to change. So if our people are changing and our world's changing, then it's kind of a no-brainer to say that our businesses have to change. That the work we're doing today is mostly thinking work. We've automated, all of those routine tasks and processes, the things that before were easy to replicate and have clearly defined. They've either been automated or they will soon. With the advent of technology, the goal is to automate anything that is simple, rote, and repeatable. And in order to then adapt quickly to all these changes, we can't stay in that corporate model. That corporate model is going to make it impossible to reorganize, to change, to respond to the changes in the environment and the changes to business as you're forced to with the increasing rate of change. Replacing people then gets harder. So the system is more complex. Everything's constantly changing, which means you can't just pluck someone out and put someone else back in. In fact, as we've been creating training plans and programs for some of our customers, we've seen that as soon as we change something or as soon as we put one in place, how quickly we have to revise and change those training plans because the roles are changing so fast. And then finally, the risk adverse, that slow change is actually going to be riskier to ultimate corporate success, because if you don't adapt and respond, you become obsolete. You become the Circuit City of the technology world who didn't make it through the transformation. You become the Borders books that disappeared in the advent of Amazon and online books and online reading and Kindles. So you really have to think about how fast things are changing and responding quickly in order to really change our businesses. So I'm going to wrap this episode up on kind of the death of corporate. And in our next episode, we're going to talk about what we need to do differently and how we can think about our businesses as beings instead of these kind of corporate machines. And if you're interested in continuing to follow along with this Evolving Workplaces series that we're going to be doing this summer, we'll be doing a bunch of episodes around corporate workplaces and webinars that are going to accompany those to go even deeper into what some of the solutions are. This is going to parallel the book that I'm writing right now around evolving workplaces. So this is a great opportunity to get involved in not only providing input to my new book, but also engaging around solutions to some of the challenges that exist in our workplaces and what we need to do to evolve them. So if you want to tune in to our series this summer on evolving workplaces, you can keep following us here right on the podcast platform, or you can go to our website, evolvingtoexceptional.com, sign up, and we will send you regular reminders for when not only the podcast episodes are released, but also when we are doing the free live webinars on LinkedIn. So look forward to talking to you more on our next episode, all about business as beings. For now, have a great day, and I hope you enjoy our Evolving to Exceptional podcast.